Greetings! Bluetti is back with a new modular monster flagship they are calling the Apex 300. For the first time in Bluetti history, they're offering a whole home backup power station in a single unit that not only has a built-in battery, but can output both 120 and 240 volts at the flip of a single switch.
Inconceivable!
But is it any good? Let's find out.
HOBOTECH.
Inside the Apex 300 is a 2765 watt-hour lithium iron phosphate battery with a claimed 6,000 cycles to 80% capacity. As for size and weight, it's approximately 21 by 13 by 13 inches and weighs in at 84 pounds. It's basically just the right size and weight, or what I still call handheld portable. I mean, if it were any bigger or heavier, I'd need wheels for this thing, and there is a trolley accessory if you need it. As for the display, it's nice and bright, easy to read from any angle. If a bit cramped with information, they somehow jammed 34 pieces of info in this little screen, and that includes input and output watts for both AC and DC separately, battery charge discharge times, battery percentage with animated icon, and a plethora of other information telling you what mode and power output state you're in. As for the inverter, here's where things get interesting. This is the first Bluetti in history to include both 120 and 240 volt split phase inverters in the same power station. That's right, no more fusion boxes with cables running everywhere requiring a dozen key presses to get going. Everything is now literally in one box and one switch to go from 120 to 240. That's it. You flip the little orange switch and you're at 240 volts. Flip it back, you're at 120. That's it. Once I flip the switch to 240, the 50 amp 240 volt outlet on the side is now hot, letting you power large appliances like split phase well pumps, stoves, mini splits, electric dryers. Most importantly, that means that it's a very easy one cable set to a transfer switch to power your entire circuit breaker box in an emergency. Bluetti makes this easy by offering several accessories that we'll check out here in a bit. Anyway, the inverter is 3,840 watts pure sine. Yes, I thought that was an odd wattage too. I guess they couldn't hit the magic 4,000 in this form factor. It offers two pairs of 120 volt 20 amp outlets rated at 1,920 watts per pair. That's important to remember. On the side, it has a single NEMA TT30R RV hookup, good for true 30 amps or 3,600 watts, and a NEMA 1450R 50 amp RV outlet rated at 3,840 watts maximum. The 120 volt inverter also offers both a 0 millisecond and 20 millisecond UPS, or uninterruptible power supply, at the same time. So let me explain. The left two outlets are set up as online UPS mode, which means they're always being powered from the inverter all the time. Therefore, offer an instant 0 millisecond switchover time for your appliances. Now, Bluetti isn't clear on how this feature might affect long-term battery life, but for anybody that's owned a basic UPS for their stereo TV or computer and have had to replace the battery in it every couple of years, it would give me a little bit of concern. Now, the right two outlets are the style we're used to with most power stations, and that's called a backup or offline UPS. These switch over from grid to inverter power in under 20 milliseconds, which is still fast enough for most computers. The benefit to backup UPS is that it doesn't use the battery at all as long as there's stable grid power. Now we're going to test the UPS mode here in a bit. As for ways to charge out of the box, as it is, there are three standard ways, from 120 volt grid at 15 amps or 1,440 watts for charging in about 2 hours. Of course, that cord is included. Or you can charge from 2,400 watts of solar in 80 minutes via a pair of XT60 connectors here on the side. Each connector supports 1,200 watts MPPT from 12 to 60 volts. That's important to remember, up to 20 amps each. Now they also include a 12-24 volt car adapter that will allow you to charge this in about 100 insect years or 28 and 14 hours respectively. You can of course dual charge from multiple sources like grid and solar for topping up in about an hour. There are also a multitude of accessories that we're going to go over here in a bit that allow charging from 240 volt grid, level 2 EV chargers, 30 amp RV hookups, high voltage solar, and their own DC to DC charger. Heck, the only thing missing is hydroelectric and nuclear.
Can you direct me to the naval base in Alameda? It's where they keep the nuclear vessels.
Also note that Bluetti is advertising a 12 kilowatt pass-through at 240 volts 50 amps. That means you can input up to that amount to both charge the batteries and run the outlets at the same time. That doesn't mean the battery actually charges at 12,000 watts. The limit on the battery charger in any situation is the same as the inverter output, or 3,840 watts. Now, this pass-through is a feature usually reserved for whole home inverter systems that has a grid tie. It lets the grid do the heavy lifting if, say, the built-in inverter gets overloaded. It just means that the inverter won't shut off as long as there's ample grid power available to power your loads. Now, what about 12-volt outputs? There are zip, zilch, zero, none. That's right, folks. Meet the first portable power station in the world with absolutely no DC outputs whatsoever. There's no 12 volt, 24 volt, no carport cigarette lighters, no USB, no wireless charging, no way to charge your phone or laptop or anything DC powered whatsoever. Now, in order to reduce cost, none of these are included on the Apex 300. Instead, meet the Hub D1. Not to be confused with the Hub A1, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The D1 is a very easy to remember name for something that most viewing this will deem an essential add-on. This separate, bulky, optional, not free add-on box rocking this big honking long cable and a big plug on the end provides up to 700 watts of DC output in the form of dual 12 or 24 volt carport lighter sockets, a pair of 5521 barrel plugs, a set of USB-A and a set of USB-C ports, and the best part, an Anderson 50 amp output. You can choose inside the app if you want these outputs to be 12 volts or 24 volts, and that includes the Anderson, and the Anderson would then switch down to 25 amps. The maximum output from this port is 600 watts, or about double what everybody else in the market offers. That means if you're wiring the Apex into a van or RV fuse box, the Hub D1 is not only mandatory, but very, very sexy. However, if you're thinking about purchasing the Hub D1 to run a bunch of high-powered DC stuff off the carport lighters or USB ports, think again. Both lighter sockets and 5521 outputs are wired in parallel, so combined all four together, they can output a total of 10 amps or 120 watts. That's for all of these. Same with the USB ports. They too share a combined output. That's a bummer. But let's be real. Anybody who's going to fork out extra for this is really getting it for the magic 50 amp DC Anderson output. Everyone else who just wants cigarette lighters or USB ports can just pick up an AC2A or EB3A for what they're charging for this separate hub. So the motto for the Apex 300 is start simple, scale smart.
Shop smart. Shop S-smart. You got that?
Now, there are two ways to look at this new modular functionality. Bluetti is either a marketing genius by keeping the base price of the Apex 300 lower by offering separate DC outputs that really not everyone's going to need. Or they're a marketing genius by charging you extra for DC outputs that you will most definitely need. Either way, you're either going to love or hate the concept of proprietary modular expansion. It's very Steve Jobsonian, and the modularity doesn't end there. For those of you old enough to remember the Sears catalog, Bluetti offers 14 additional accessories to go with your Apex 300. Yes, 14. Let's go over them briefly. Starting with page 1, you have the smart distribution box. That's Bluetti's version of the EcoFlow smart home panel that you integrate into your home wiring for solar, AC, and generator coupling. The Hub A1, which lets you hook up to 3 Apex 300s together in parallel and combine their output, the Reliant sub-panel transfer switch, and the aforementioned D1 hub for DC output. Page 2, you have the Solar X4K, which is not a fancy model of television, but it lets you hook up to 6,400 watts of solar into the Apex 300. The S1 smart plug that lets you do home automation. The Charger 1, which is their 560 watt DC to DC charger. The Trolley 2 used for transporting the Apex. The 30 amp charging cable for 30 amp 120 volt charging. So for page 3, we're up to the 50 amp 240 volt Apex charging cable, the 11 kilowatt EV charging cable, a pair of battery connection cables, and finally the battery charging cable for charging from raw batteries. Whew. I should also note that like all the other large offerings from Bluetti, the Apex 300 is fully expandable to some pretty crazy numbers, like 58 kilowatt hours of battery capacity and 11.5 kilowatts of inverter power when 3 of these Apex 300s are hooked together in parallel using that Hub A1 we talked about earlier. Of course, they can all be smartly hooked up to your home or off-grid property and do amazing things. With some of the previously mentioned accessories, you can even tie in those high-voltage residential panels that might already be on your roof. and that's kind of neat. As for the warranty, Bluetti offers a 5-year warranty on this product, and according to the user manual, it is UL 2743 and UL 1741 certified. And of course, we took the Apex into my secret lab here where we performed all kinds of crazy experiments on it. Starting with the AC battery capacity test, it scored 2400 watts even out of 2765 for 87%, which is about average and on par with the rest of Bluetti's lineup. Now, I did run the test a second time at 240 volts, and I did that by pulling equal loads between both 120 volt legs, and to no big surprise, it scored a virtually identical result. Then we did the phantom load or parasitic drain test. Of course, there's no DC on this, so I didn't do any DC tests, but for AC consumption at 120 volts, it used 291 watt hours over 12 hours, or about 582 watt hours over 24 hours. So if you left the inverter on, it would totally kill the battery in about 4 3/4 days, which is excellent. Now, just to verify those results, I did a second test at 240 volts for 6 hours, and it wasted 151 watt hours. That works out to a very similar 604 watt hours over 24 hours, and that's within margin of error for this test, so let's just call it identical. So averaging both results and doing the math, this works out to 24.7 watts of wasted power at idle. Now, this is above average performance for this size inverter. Now, Bluetti does claim on page 28 of their product manual that it has an idle consumption of 20 watts, so they're a bit off on their estimates, but it's still quite impressive. To put this in perspective, EcoFlow's newest flagship, the Delta Pro 3, with a similar sized inverter, wastes 49 watts at idle, or twice as much. So I'm always asked how long stuff's going to run on these products, so compensating for the usable capacity that we just figured out, you can pause this chart I'm going to put up on screen so you can see approximately how long common appliances will run on this unit. Pure sine check, 120 volts, 60 hertz, pass. And under 240 volt operation, it's 240 volts, 60 hertz. Inverter capacity test. This is where we determine how hard can we push the built-in inverter. This inverter is 3,840 watts, so we're going to start at around 3,800 and push it and see how far we can take it. 48, 49, almost 5,000 watts, and it shuts down at 5,000 watts. That's pretty darn good. Okay, we're going to perform the same test, but this time using a 240 volt system. 32, 38, 46, 5,200, 5,300. It's holding it. Okay, we got almost 5 seconds at 5,200. All right, 15 amp saw test. This thing is really loud. Yeah, no problem there. 1,500 watt electric heater, no problem, of course. 1,800 watt heat gun all the way up. Or as we call it, the solar degenerator. Again, no problem. How about an in-wall air conditioner? I have a 5,000 BTU up there on the wall. There we go, compressor kicked on. It hit about 600-700 watts there for a few seconds, and now it's running at about 300 watts. Next is the 5-minute sustained cooling or heat soak test, where we run it for 5 minutes at its maximum inverter capacity. I'm going to do this with 240 volts just because it's easier for me. It doesn't matter either way because the inverter does both at the same power level, so if it passes on one, it's going to pass on the other. There we are, 4,000 watts. It's come back in 5. Okay, 2 minutes in, it shut down, so I'm going to have to down tune this to around 3,850 if I can. Okay, we're restarting this time at 3,900 watts. Let it run for 5 minutes. Okay, again at 2 minutes, it shut down at 3,900. I'm going to back it down to 3,800. I have no way to get just down to 3,840. I'm going to have to underclock it slightly. All right, resetting, this time at 3,800 watts. Let's hope it passes this time. Okay, we just passed 5 minutes at 3,800 watts. No problem, that's a big pass. Now, while it's running its maximum fans, let's see how loud it is. 53 decibels from a meter away, pretty good. Next test is the max input rate check. This is where we pump as much solar, external battery, whatever we can into the pair of XT60 connectors. So they have a pair of XT60 connectors here on the side, regular XT60. Each one supports 12 to 60 volts, up to 20 amps, 1,200 watts apiece. So that means this can take up to 2,400 watts of solar when split between those two inputs. Now, 12 to 60 volts, that's kind of tough to do. So let's go ahead and plug in our simulated solar into one side and see what we get. Okay, before we continue with the testing, I need to let you know that I did go into the app and enable Pro mode. That allows me to unlock the full 20 amps from 16 to 60 volts. So it says it right there. This allows me to pump as much as possible into the solar ports. Okay, so typical for Bluetti at 13.6 volts, it allows 8.2 amps for charging at 100 watts even. Let's go ahead and turn this up to 18 volts, which is a low and smaller solar panel. And here you can see it immediately jumps up to 20 amps. It says 18.2, but it actually is 20. I measured it. You can see here at 18 volts, we're getting 315 watts. That's pretty darn good. So that means you can have a pretty large solar panel that only outputs 18 volts and still hit a pretty decent input. Okay, at 24 volts, like say you're going to charge from a larger single solar panel or a 24 volt battery at 20 amps, you're getting just over 430 watts. We call it 435. Okay, at 50 volts, 20 amps, we're getting around 850, 860 watts. That sounds about right. Just let you know, I have it at 60 volts. It is taking forever to get up to 1200 watts input. I'm sitting here waiting. It's probably been about 4 or 5 minutes. It is slowly trickling up to 1200 watts, which is the maximum at 60 volts. Looks like we're at 1070 and it's not going any further. This is outputting 20 amps. Okay, we're back and this thing is really struggling to get past 1100 watts at 61 volts. I actually have about 65 volts pumping into it. That's all she's taking and she ain't taking no more. Barely hitting 1100 watts. Let me unplug this and show you how high the voltage I have set. Yeah, I have it set at almost 70 volts. If I plug this back in, it's probably not going to allow it to charge. Let's see. Now I'm getting an error on the solar. Let's see if it'll take 65. But yeah, 1200 watts is really pushing it. If they're saying it'll do 1200 watts at 60 volts, I'm not seeing it, guys. Yeah, it's giving me over voltage warnings if I'm doing anything over 60. Let's see. Well, let me do 62. 62, I'll take 62. All right, it seems to allow 62. At 62 volts, of course it drops the voltage as it pulls power. Now it's doing the MPPT thing. This is going to ramp all the way back up to 61. Okay, we've been sitting here for about 3 minutes. We finally are back up to 61 volts at 20 amps, and we're barely hitting 1100 watts. I'm going to up the voltage just a little bit more past where I'm supposed to see if I can force this thing past 1100. It's just not happening, guys. Okay, now I understand this isn't a real solar panel or a real battery, but it is a pretty darn good and expensive power supply, and it kind of does tell the truth, which you can't really replicate sometimes in the real world with solar panels, because trying to get 1200 watts out of 60 volts where the solar panels is not an easy thing to do. You're pushing the 20 amp maximum on MC4 connectors anyway when you do that. It looks like the real world maximum here is going to be about 1100 watts per MPPT. This should really be supporting 150 volts or more. We're going to get to that here in a bit. All right, next, AC charging. So what are the AC charging limits? Now, at 120 volts with a supplied cable, the maximum is 15 amps. What's kind of cool, though, with this Bluetti is they have a switch on the front. You don't have to go to an app or press a bunch of buttons. There's a single switch that lets you choose between silent, which is obviously the slowest, quietest, turbo, which is obviously the fastest, loudest, and auto lets you set it to whatever you want inside the apps. We're going to start on turbo. We're just going to go ahead and leave it on that for a moment and see how fast it goes. 1450 watts. I'll go ahead and put it in auto. This is without changing anything in the app. No change, 1450 watts. Let's switch to silent. That definitely shuts the fan off and makes it silent. Right around 500 watts. Okay, so now we know what the standard modes do without any modifications. I went into the app and I unlocked what they call Pro mode, and if you want to know the password, it's all 8s. So you can see here I have Pro mode unlocked that allows you to change this slider to whatever you want. Now, I say 50 amps. Is it going to blow up my system? No, actually it doesn't matter what you input into Pro mode, because even if you do anything over 12 amps in Pro mode, it ignores it if you're on 120 volts. This is more or less if you're charging from 240 volts or another source. It allows you to charge apparently up to 50 amps. But if I set it all the way down to 1 amp, it really does charge at 1 amp. So check that out. If you only want to charge this thing at 130 watts, you absolutely can. And that's pretty darn slow. I haven't seen a power station this large that'll let you slow it down that low. I think EcoFlow at the lowest is 200 watts I've seen. So it's kind of nice. You can just change this slider to like whatever you want up to 12 amps, because anything over 12 amps at 120 volts it just ignores. So you do have full control over AC grid charging. And just how loud is it at maximum AC charging? Well, you can barely hear the thing. 44 decibels from a meter away, pretty darn quiet. So what about 240 volt charging? Well, Bluetti did not supply me a cable or any way to charge from 240 volts. You have to plug it into a special port on the side, which means a special cable. If I don't have the special cable, well, I just can't test any 240 volt charging on this. That's unfortunate, but we'll just move on. But we can test simultaneous charging, so charging from solar or a battery externally and grid at the same time. So for example, you have a gas or propane generator plugged in and you have a bunch of solar panels plugged in. Just how fast can you charge this thing simultaneously? So we already have it charging from the grid maximum at 1450 watts. I'm going to go ahead and pump 62 volts of solar into one side and see what happens. So let me tell you something that's kind of nice about the Bluetti, the way they have this set up, is they have DC and AC input and output separate. So while I'm charging from the grid, I could see it's still 1450 watts from the grid, but I could see a separate number of how much solar is coming in. Slowly ticking up the solar, going to be getting close to 1100 watts on this side, and then we have the 1450 on this side. But it does say in the book that the maximum charge rate when you're charging from solar and AC at the same time is going to be 3840 watts. That's going to be the maximum charge rate in any situation. 240 volts, 120 volts, solar, combined, any situation you can think of, 3840 watts seems to be the maximum. This page right here pretty much says it all. You can see everything there. It says 3840 watts on it. Okay, so your next question might be, if you're charging from grid power or from a generator at 120 volts, does it output both 120 and 240 or just one or the other? So it's obviously going to output 120 volts. So I have 120 volts turned on. I have the inverter turned on. It's obviously going to power anything coming out of these. So we're currently charging from the grid at 120 volts, which is standard. Let's switch this over to 240 volts and then kick on the AC inverter. Do we get 240 volts while it's charging with 120? So we're getting 1440 watts coming in from the grid right now at 120 volts. And I had this adapter, which let me check both legs of the split. Yeah, we actually have, and I'm going to just for S's and G's, check both sides of this to make sure that we're getting power from both 240 volt legs. And yes, we are. So yeah, we're getting a full split phase 240 volts while we're charging from the grid at 120. Now, not a lot of power stations do this. So just to let you know, you can switch between 120 and 240 on the fly. It does turn off and come back on, but as you see, it's going to charge again, and now these outlets are hot. You can output both 120 and 240 while charging from 120. Next is the most controversial test on the entire interwebs, the UPS test. Now, I need to explain something quickly. They actually have two different kinds of UPS built into this, an online UPS and a backup UPS. Online UPS means that it's online all the time. There is no switch. There is no switch. It's a 0 millisecond changeover time because there is no changeover. It's just constantly being powered by the inverter. The other two outlets are backup UPS like you'd have on a typical power station, and they offer a 20 millisecond switching time. So these two don't switch over at all. They're always running from the inverter. So I have the computer plugged into the 20 millisecond one. That's obviously the one we want to test. As soon as I hit this button, it's going to stop charging. It's going to cut off the power. We're going to see how fast it switches over. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Nothing at all. That's what we want to see. Computer didn't freeze, nothing else happened. I'm going to turn the power back on so you can see this for yourself. There's the power on, and there's the power off. The computer is unfazed. So there's no point in testing the 0 millisecond side because like I said, it's on all the time. So this will run your computers or other sensitive electronics no problem through a power outage. Now, while doing this test, I found out something very interesting about the 240 volts. And that is, when you're in 120 volt mode like I am now, all these outlets are hot. So be aware of that. If you do have 240 volt appliance plugged into the 240 volt side, don't think that because you're in 120 volt mode, you're not getting anything out of the 240. You absolutely are. In fact, both sides are lit up at 120 volts. Now, this is what you want in an RV. So if you're going to plug this into a 50 amp RV, even at 120 volts, you're still going to get power to both sides of your fuse box. Same thing with your home. You're still going to get power to both sides of your fuse box if you're in 120 volt mode. It just doesn't do the split phase, so you can't run 240 volt appliances. Now you switch over to 240. Again, it's going to send 120 to each, but on a different frequency so that it will power 240 volt appliances. Amp interference test. Does the inverter make amplifiers hum? Let's find out. Sounds perfectly clear. So that's not unexpected. That means that you can use the Apex 300 to power amplifiers, ham radios, and such without any interference. EMF test, let's see how much electromagnetic interference this thing gives off. I got a baseline reading of 1. Let's go ahead and turn it on. And as the wireless stuff turns itself on, we are going to get a few blips. So with the machine turned on and the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled, we're getting somewhere between 20 and 30. It's kind of random. There's no DC to test on this machine, so we'll just go ahead and put the inverter on. So with the inverter on, we hit about 50, 55, 60, 65, 60. All right, so around 60, that's actually not too bad. All right, AM radio test. Let's go ahead and turn this on. Go ahead and turn on the AC inverter. All right, we're really not getting any AM interference with the inverter on, so that's pretty good. Now, for the sake of brevity in this review, I'm not going to do the whole add-on battery test with this. I have a separate review of Bluetti's B300K battery. It's actually a very good battery, and I have several of them. They sent me a couple more to test with this. I tested it all offline. It connects. It works just fine. The meters do calibrate, so if you have a battery up here is 50% and this is 100%, it'll be 75% between the two or whatever the calculation is. Everything seemed to work fine. Everything connected just fine. So I'm not going to waste everyone's time. They do suggest bundling this with one or more B300K batteries because you get a pretty good deal, a lot of watt hours for a low price. So I'll just let you know in advance, it all works just fine. Okay, so one last thing. I'm not going to go over Bluetti's app. I've done it for every one of their products for the last couple of years. It's not any different. It does all the same functionality as all their other Bluetti products. But one thing I do want to show you is for those of you that hate apps, you don't want to install the app, you don't want to put it on your phone, you don't care about getting updates to your product, you just want to take the thing out of the box, turn it on, and use it in an off-grid situation. You don't want Wi-Fi, you don't want Bluetooth. I'm going to show you how you can turn all that off. It's right here in the manual. So in order to get into the manual settings inside the box, you hold the Eco and AC buttons at the same time for a couple of seconds, and you'll see it blinks P01, and then the number 60 will start blinking. Well, the first setting is the frequency of the inverter, which in the United States is going to be 60 hertz. So there you have it, setting 1, 60 hertz. The next setting is going to be 3, and that's going to allow you to change the charging modes. You can change the charging mode between silent and turbo and stuff if for some reason you didn't want to use this switch. Hit it again, that's power lifting mode. You can turn that on and off. That's their system that lowers the voltage to allow more amps. I don't recommend you use that. Then you can turn on and off eco mode through the settings if you didn't want to use the button again for some reason. This is where you turn off Bluetooth. So you can actually just turn Bluetooth off right there. It's turned off, it's off forever. What about Wi-Fi? Well, I want to turn that off. I could turn that off forever. So now Bluetooth and Wi-Fi is completely turned off. I know it's going to make a lot of people happy that you can do that. But the last setting is P08, which is a little baby in a suitcase. And I was trying to figure out what in the world is a little baby's head doing in a suitcase? Well, so in the manual back in the beginning, it shows the screen and it says that is the child lock. So that allows you to lock out the buttons so you don't have your toddler coming by and turning things on and off. So that's kind of neat, but you do have to go either into the app or into the special settings to turn on the child lock. So if for some reason you go to use your power station and the buttons aren't working, the child lock is turned on. So what do I think about the Apex 300? Well, despite the lack of built-in DC output, I have to admit I think the Apex 300 is probably the best product Bluetti has ever released, especially at this price point. It works well, it strikes just about every chord, tickles almost every fancy. It's not bloated in any way, yet full of amazing features. It's probably the closest thing Bluetti ever released that almost does it all. But, and that's a big but, and I cannot lie, the biggest surprise, other than the lack of built-in DC outputs, which I can almost forgive, this being designed as a home backup product, is the ridiculously low MPPT voltage of the built-in solar controllers. Only 12 to 60 volts on a product that's supposed to run your entire home during a disaster?
Inconceivable! You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
And to top it off, I wasn't able to even achieve that 1200 watt limit in the lab, even overclocking the input to 62 volts. At best, I was able to get around 1100. Now, this ain't the end of the world, since you're very unlikely to get a set of solar panels with just the right voltage and amps to hit that magic 1200 watts anyway. To put this in perspective, this is the same lower-end MPPT controller they offer in their entry-level power stations. Why did they offer at least one high-voltage MPPT option? Oh, I can tell you why. Accessories! So remember the Solar X4K? Hey, how about that? You can use up to 500 volts of solar, up to 4,000 watts. If you buy that, well, how much is it? According to the pricing I received, it's a $499 add-on. Start simple, scale smart.
You got that?
So yeah, the Apex 300 flagship has only basic solar support built in, no DC outputs of its own, and to upgrade requires adding on some pricey accessories. And here's where all that cost cutting and modularity truly pay off. Because the base model Apex 300 you see right here starts at a ridiculously low price of $11.99 if you catch the super early bird deal. If you miss that, the price goes up to $13.99. Now we're talking a 2800 watt hour product with a 3800 watt inverter that can do both 120 and 240 volt operation in a single unit, starting at 43 cents per watt hour. Now, this is a price point you would expect from an entry-level fly-by-nighter, not some big player like Bluetti, and that includes a 5-year warranty to boot. Now, they sent me this insane spreadsheet with over 50 prices on it. I'm not going to bore you with all that garbage. If you really want to see every bundle deal they offer, simply click the link in the description of the video I provide and check it out for yourself. Now, I will mention two bundle prices I think you're going to care about. That's the Apex 300 with one B300K Add On Battery, and the Apex 300 Plus, the Hub D1, which we saw earlier, with those DC outputs. Now, the Apex 300 with the B300K battery gives you 5,530 watt hours total, and it's starting super early bird at $19.49, then increases to $22.79 by the end of the campaign. That's a crazy good deal, starting at 35 cents per watt hour. Even at the latter price, that's still only 41 cents per watt hour. If you want a basic home backup system, a system to run your van or RV, or something just to run a 240 volt well pump, HVAC, or welder, you can't beat this deal with a stick. Now, if you want those DC outputs like the dual carport USBs and the oh so tempting Anderson 50 amp output, the Apex 300 with the Hub D1 bundle, what you see right here, according to that price sheet, starts at $12.99 for Super Early Bird and rolls through $14.99 for the regular Early Bird. So if you're curious what the Hub D1 is by itself, this alone starts at $219 and will retail for $379. So please note these prices are crowdfunding prices and are subject to change over time. No doubt this product could and very likely will get a lot more expensive once it goes retail. So if the Apex 300 sounds like something you'd be interested in, the sooner you buy, the lower the price is going to be for you. And if you're new to crowdfunding and it's freaking you out, it's perfectly safe. Now, as long as the promoting brand is one that you trust. Bluetti has been around for many years. They have at least a half a dozen of these under their belts by now. The only major downside to investing in a crowdfund is that sometimes there are shipping delays, and you might have to wait longer than expected to get your product. In other words, this is not an Amazon 2-day shipping product. You're going to be waiting several weeks or possibly a couple of months to get one. Bluetti does not want to send out products that are full of bugs and problems. They're going to take their time and make sure that everything works right. And that's why they actually delayed the release of this by a couple of weeks. They had something they wanted to fix, and they fixed it. So Bluetti is pretty good at nipping this kind of stuff in the bud, and you're going to receive a quality product. And I base that solely on how solid my pre-production model has been. You saw the testing, it does great. The Apex 300 also has a firmware update feature built in, so you can update it over time with new fixes and features, unlike some of their earlier products. So if you're interested in the Apex 300, the link is going to be in the description of this video below. I'm also going to put a link here at the bottom of the screen, along with a QR code that you can scan if you're on a mobile device, if you're watching me on TV, and apparently a lot of you are. That's going to take you on over to the Bluetti page where you can check out the Apex 300. Thanks for watching, and until next time.
Odin commands you to like and subscribe, and clean my litter box.